Welcome. We are excited to start our second in this inaugural program of the Trachtenberg School's Executive in Residence program. I am thrilled today to have Omar Woodard with us. As we were speaking earlier, we have been in communications and LinkedIn for many years, and this is our first time actually being what I like to consider face-to-face in this day and age. So thank you so much for taking the time. I think you have about 6 different jobs, and we're looking forward to hearing all about that. So we will do a recorded session at this point. I have a number of questions we'll go with, and then we'll turn the recording off and open it up for our students. So the first thing just to ask you is just a few-minute introduction about your current work and your career path, and then we'll go from there.
I'll start with my current work and then share with you how I got there. So I'm currently the executive director of HRS Management, which is a single family office for the Harris family, Josh and Marjorie Harris. A family office is basically an LLC, a business that manages, preserves the wealth of ultra high net worth individuals and families. And so it exists, it's an investment vehicle basically to manage the wealth of wealthy people. How did I get there? My life and career is kind of mixed up in these ideas of wealth, philanthropy, and legacy. From grades 1 through 12, I went to a school called Girard College, which was a 1 through 12 boarding school for low-income single-parent children in Philadelphia. It was created by the Bill Gates of his time in the late 1800s, a man named Stephen Girard, who was a French immigrant. He left upon his death $6 million to the city of Philadelphia to create a school for, at that point, white orphan boys. The Supreme Court desegregated it after a Supreme Court case in 1968, which allowed Black boys and then women of all to enter. I say all of that to say I was raised up in this idea that that old wealth when done well, when invested well, can bear fruit. And so this school is now 175 years old, of young people like me who otherwise might have had suboptimal education. And we were able to get a wonderful education as a result. But I didn't see philanthropy. I didn't see that legacy building as a career for me. My interest was in government. I went to school at GW undergrad from Philly, as well as grad school. In my senior year, I was student body president of the student association, and that gave me insight into managing a $1 million organization, but also being a trustee of a $1 billion institution. And that gave me insight into management and governance. And so I went straight into grad school and did the MPA program and focused on nonprofit management and governance. That shaped my career. And so my career, I like to say, is in 3 phases. The first is in politics. I worked on Capitol Hill. I was a lobbyist that represented African governments in the U.S. and U.S. companies that did business in Africa. I was a political campaign person. I was a policy director at the state legislative level, at the federal level, and at the local level for a mayoral campaign. And I was a candidate. I ran for state senate and I ran for city council. But that's one part of my life. The next part of my life shifted into philanthropy, and I started working for organizations out of DC, Venture Philanthropy Partners, and others that were wealthy individuals who wanted to take their investment acumen to bring to bear on issues for social good. And so I worked for 10 years across Venture Philanthropy Partners and then Greenlight Fund around this issue of venture philanthropy. So I pivoted from politics to this venture capital, venture philanthropy, and that was the second part of my world. And now this third part where I'm at now is this idea of family offices and the preservation and accumulation of wealth to what end? And some of those goals, you can, as I circle back to kind of where I started, which is a school called Girard College. A man who got incredibly wealthy and decided what he wanted to do was pay it forward, right? Nearly 2 centuries coming. What does it take to be able to have that type of orientation as a high net worth individual, as a wealthy person who becomes incredibly blessed in this type of economy that we have? What is their obligation to create social good and legacy that pays out for centuries ahead. And so that's kind of this third iteration of where my career is. How do I not just run the family office that I'm doing, but also consult and advise and work with others who are in that space. So the kind of wealth management, wealth advisory, link with family legacy and wealth accumulation, preservation to what end is the phase of the career that I'm in now. So that's how I got to where I am and a little bit about me.
Oh my gosh. So I have these questions. I have other questions in my head, but we're going to go through these. So I can't wait to see what the next phases are going to be. Um, what have been the most pivotal moments in your career, and how did they shape your leadership approach?
Yeah, two come to mind. What's the same about both of them is that they were values moments where I had to take really big risks. Um, the first was having a client in the president of Uganda, still President Museveni. But this was in 2007, 2008, um, who didn't believe that there were gay people in his country. He didn't believe that homosexuality existed in his country, and if it did, then it should be criminalized. And he said that out loud while the company that I was working for was representing him in during his state visit for then President Bush. And he was feted by President Bush. They had a great relationship. So you have a moment there where you have to say, can I work at a company that would represent someone like this? And given the proximity I have to this person and their team, do I have an obligation to say something, right? That would put my job at risk. And so it was the least I could do was to tell my boss, the CEO of the firm, I can't do this. And these are the reasons why. And um, at the time, I had represented kind of, outreach to the Democratic caucus at the time. And it would have destroyed my credibility to be able to go to them on any range of issues if I stood up on that issue. So that was one. And then I think the second issue was an issue of fundraising, which I was raising. Had to raise a $3.5 million fund as executive director of the Greenlight Fund. And there was a question of whether to accept money from a particular donor or not. And it was a significant amount of money that would have helped me raise a lot more money, right? But a judgment decision had to be made. We didn't have a gift acceptance policy, so there was no framework for us to have a discussion about the morale, the ethics, not morale, the ethics of accepting certain gifts. But I took a big risk. Two things were true about this gift. One, not only would have closed our fund, it would have allowed us to create a platform to raise more money because of the stature of this person. And however, the downside was that this person was incredibly well known. This person was not famous, but infamous. And there would have been a reputation, a connotation with accepting that money that I thought would have played out negatively. And to be sure, that individual, this was 10 years ago, that individual is Jeffrey Yaz. And Jeffrey Yaz in Pennsylvania is the wealthiest guy in Pennsylvania who's known to be funding a whole range of different things that a lot of people would find not great. So it played out that I'm glad we didn't take that money. So anyway, what those two things together are times where I showed courage. There are times where I didn't, and I want to be clear, right? And I have to work with that too. But those were two times where there was a threshold question for me, where like my values and who I am versus like the work I do, they have to mesh. They have to be able to work in tandem. And if they don't, then I have to extricate myself from the situation. And that was something that continues to be very important to me when you're working in issues of politics, issues of wealth, and issues of social justice and social good. You have to have clear thresholds for some of these things.
Oh gosh, courage. And this is kind of similar, but there might be some different areas. But this is, how have you navigated challenges or setbacks in your career? And any advice you would give for others facing those kinds of moments?
Yeah. Number one is that there's really just no way to but through. There's um, everything else is on the other side of what you're feeling. But you have to have, you can't have a blind belief that you're going to get through it. You have to visualize the type of thing that needs to be true for things to be okay. So what that means is, to give an example, I was a policy director for a candidate, and I submitted the wrong thing, the wrong file, right? And it was to a fairly important thing. It was to the Federation of Teachers. It was to the teachers union, and they quickly realized that I had submitted the wrong thing, but they didn't tell us. Of course, they told us when we got there, and so it just made me look horrible. Like, and it made me look. It was an oversight of my part, on my part, and so the question was like, oh my God, one, are they going to fire me? Um, Two, did I create like irreparable damage to the campaign? Three, did I do irreparable damage to my reputation? Right, those are three things that were in my mind. But all I knew was that the work that I had done to that date stood for something. There was a certain level of confidence that that work had given me. It had given them and me, and so I had to stand on that. And in order to get through that, I just had to put out better work more consistently.
Mm,
And what that forced me to do was operate at a higher level for a sustained period.
mm,
There's drawbacks to that. There's drawbacks to operating in overdrive for a sustained period, wear and tear, whether human or mechanical. Um, but that's what that did for me. So again, one big takeaway here is, um, uh, one thing has both sides. Like, one thing can be true on both sides. It can be great for you and move you forward. And on the flip side, it can have deleterious impacts in one part of you or another. And so you always have to remember that. There's no binaries and what's all good and what's all bad. All the things we do have these drawbacks and these tensions, and it's what we have to kind of manage through. I think we think about that professionally, but I think it's important for us to see that both professional, holistically.
mm.
Uh, I think that's helpful.
Oh, fantastic. What do you think differentiates you as a leader, and how has your leadership evolved, and what factors influence this evolution?
It's always great to be a thinker, the person who is the go-to person, to strategize, to come up with the context in which, there's advantages and disadvantages, and to think through but then you need, like, okay, how do we execute this plan? Who executes this plan? And for a long time in my career, I was the strategist, the advisor. I was the shaper of the agenda to be delivered, rather than the agenda deliverer, the agenda promoter, the agenda executor. And it took me until I was 10 years into my career, professionally, where I finally got the point to be like an executive director, like
Mm,
manage a board, manage my full P&L of a full enterprise, um, like, invest, like, do the run payroll, the whole thing. And that was incredibly humbling, as someone who spent a lot of time advising, counseling, and being a strategist, over periods of time for people. To have to do it all myself and take my own advice was incredibly humbling. But it was that that is what differentiates me now. It was the ability to be both really good at one
mm,
and become better at another. And so now I see myself as a more holistic leader. I can be the person, which is great, because leaders they don't need to be expert at everything. They're going to be expert at one or two things, which is relevant for the core of the business, whether that business be government, a nonprofit, a for-profit, or a foundation. They're going to be expert at a couple of things, but they need to be fluent, but they need to be conversant enough
mm,
across the broad footprint of an enterprise. And so, to be able to strategize on issues of investments, on issues of personnel, on issues of program development and evaluation, on issues of external relations and our context in the political economy of a country, of a city, of a region, all of those things I can do but I can also go into a meeting about the tactical needs and
Mm.
not have to lead, but still be able to know enough to be able to add value. And so it's being a more holistic leader that I think differentiates me. And I got that from the Trachtenberg School, right? The ability to do that, to hear from practitioners who do that, I think gave me a leg up. I got to Trachtenberg School, I was 21, right? So I came out 23. So that was a crucial year for me to put things in practice, and then kind of took off from there.
Well,
But think or endure.
yeah, and
That's the differentiator for me.
I also love the difference between fluency and conversant. I'm
Yeah,
going to
there's a
feel
difference.
that. That's actually really, I love that to help people understand. You can't be fluent in every language, right? But can you be conversant in a number of them in addition to being fluent in a
And
few?
being conversant in another language as opposed to fluent builds trust because
Yeah.
it's humbling. To like I'm not coming to this conversation knowing much, but I can at least know enough to have a conversation with you. I think on the other side, it shows a willingness to learn or a learning orientation, a learning posture. And I think it shows humility because because you're at a disadvantage among people when you're in a room of people who are expert in that. But that's only if you view it as a disadvantage. It's actually an advantage to my mind because you see things that they don't. So it's a good marriage, good partnership.
I like that framework a lot. I'm sure you get hear that. You hear this a lot. People are like, "You ever thought about writing a book?" Um,
Yeah, these frameworks are all things that and will end up
yeah,
somewhere, I'm
yeah,
sure.
we'll be bringing you in for that book talk, but I love
Yeah.
that the value in being conversant, because I think people often view that as a disadvantage, and the fact that you're talking about the learner mindset and it shows somebody that humility and that presence, that's spot on. My gosh. The final question that we'll do here before we open it, we end the recording and open up to questions is, what is one leadership lesson you wish you learned earlier in career, or a piece of advice that you received that you're like, gosh, this has really resonated. I wish I had known this earlier on.
Yeah, maybe more will come to mind as I start speaking, but the first is like is see the whole thing and then do the whole thing. And what that means is a lot of us early in our career have responsibility for parts of a whole. But even though you have to see the whole, and you have to understand how critical your part is in the whole, or develop a compelling narrative as to why your piece is so critical. Um, because again, generalist versus expert, right? Um, you're going to know your piece really well, but that's never been good enough.
Mm,
It's important to know how good your piece is and the role it plays in context of the whole, and to be able to talk about how special but not unique your role is.
mm,
It's not unique because that you share a lot of the same challenges that other roles might, but a lot of the same opportunities. So I just say that to say, um, early in our career, we were head down, and
mm,
there's nothing wrong with focusing on what piece, what percentage of my pie, what percentage of the overall pie do I have here,
mm,
and not only how big is my pie, how small is my pie, what is my pie, but what does that other pie look like? How do I operate in the context of this big piece? And that was always helpful because it helped me um, be a value add and to be able to translate my piece across other pieces.
mm,
And that's where I think, again, Trachtenberg School allows you like the ability to be able to have, um, to be conversant across a bunch of different areas, but to have yours. And so seeing the whole thing, and then for me, doing the whole thing is more around um, uh, a lot of people see work tactically. I want to I have a job. They want me to put on an event, and so my job is to do an event, and I put an event on. No, your job is to not to put on an event. The job is to tell a story of which the event is the vehicle that you showcase the story.
mm,
And that way the story becomes art, it becomes dynamic, it becomes about people. But if you do an event, you'll just do an event. If you're telling a story that has a theme And that's why people theme conferences, everything is built around kind of that core, that core message, that core story. So it comes back to for individuals, for you as a professional, like what is the core story that you're trying to tell? What are the themes? And then based on those themes, you have a variety of different vehicles to deliver those themes. Sometimes it's an event, sometimes it's a website, sometimes it's a talk, sometimes it's a piece of legislation. It depends. And so it's just really important to move in a posture where you're communicating a long-term story around resonant human themes, regardless of how, stale the topic might be. That's really what it's all about. And so tell the story, so you can do the thing.
I listen to a lot. I've been out for a long time, working for a long time, and your perspective here is just very fresh, very authentic and very fresh. I really, this was absolutely wonderful. So I thank you so much, Omar, for being one of our first executive in residences. At this point, I'm going to turn the recording off. We're going to use this to share with other people who will hopefully schedule to meet with you. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So thank you.
Thank you.